Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. The US withdraws from formal peace negotiations with Ukraine after Putin refused to agree to a ceasefire. Israel launches airstrikes at Damascus as Netanyahu sends a message to Syria. Germany's AfD party is labelled far-right extremist by the country's intelligence agency. And actor Russell Brand is bailed after appearing in court on rape and sexual assault charges. Now to our top story, and the United States will no longer take part in peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine after Russia's President Vladimir Putin refused to sign up to a ceasefire. It comes a day after the US signed a historic minerals deal with Ukraine. The US State Department said it was changing the way it contributed to the ongoing talks and would no longer fly around the world at the drop of a hat for meetings. They added that Kyiv and Moscow must now present concrete proposals for ending the war and meet directly to resolve the conflict. Speaking to Fox News, Vice President JD Vance said the war in Ukraine was not going to end anytime soon. Take a listen.
I really don't believe that any person, of the 8 billion people in the world, I don't think anybody could have gotten this deal done other than Donald J. Trump. When I say this deal, I mean getting these guys to actually propose a peace settlement, but it's going to be up to the Russians and the Ukrainians. Now that each side knows what the other's terms for peace are, it's going to be up to them to come to an agreement and stop this brutal conflict. It's not going anywhere, Brett. It's not going to end anytime soon.
For more on this, I'm joined by John Cavillage, a senior editor of outcome modelling analysis, Issue Insight. John, thank you for joining me on the show. The US has withdrawn from formal Ukraine peace negotiations. What is behind this decision, and will America still have some kind of involvement?
I won't use a political metaphor, but I'll use an automotive metaphor. The Trump-Vance administration has not gone into reverse. They haven't gone into park. They haven't gone into neutral. They've downshifted. But no one should believe that there will not continue to be, a bet quietly, continuing engagement by the Trump-Vance administration with the Russian government and the Trump-Vance administration with the Zelensky government in Kyiv. So there, what is being said, it's very important with President Trump to always listen carefully to the words. And there hasn't been that statement, which is, we're out, we don't want anything to do with it, everyone is on their own. There's still an acknowledgement that the United States has played an important role to get them to where they've gotten to, and will also need to be playing that role to basically get everybody over the finish line.
We heard from JD Vance just a little bit earlier, who has warned the war won't end anytime soon. Do you agree with his assessment?
No question that I think everyone that follows what's happened during the last 4 years and has been involved in some way or another, disappointed that the ceasefire that President Trump had initially asked the Ukrainians to agree to, and they didn't, ask the Russians to agree to, and privately there was an opening. There was a reason for President Trump to believe that he had a deal with President Putin, and it is very disappointing. I think Vice President Vance is probably right that this is going to take a while, and very much this goes back to, there are two basic questions here that Russia and Ukraine have to answer. The first is, which country is willing to do what the other country isn't willing to do to win? So President Putin is willing to attack in Ukraine schools and hospitals and train stations and apartment buildings and basically kill civilians. President Zelensky doesn't have that option because not only will his own people not let him do it, but the countries that are supporting Ukraine won't let him do it. So there's a mismatch there. And as long as President Putin will do what President Zelensky can't do, basically advantage Putin. The other is this. There is a number that both of them have. President Zelensky and President Putin have in their heads. There's a number of dead that when they reach that number internally, domestically, politically, their advisors will say, we've got to call it a day. Doesn't matter what the playing field looks like, but that number politically, we can't sustain anymore. The bad news is neither president has reached their number.
John, according to reports, the Trump team has prepared options to pressure Moscow. Is this a significant escalation from the Trump administration to get Putin to agree to a ceasefire deal? Is there frustration here?
There is frustration. I wouldn't categorize it as a significant escalation because President Trump has always dangled in the shiny object for President Putin to see that there will be consequences. What he hasn't done is come out and said, here's the list, Vladimir, of what's going to happen to you until more recently. And they started to, put some of the 500% tariff that was floated that any country that imported oil, natural gas, minerals, uranium from Russia could get hit with 500% tariffs. That would hit India very, very hard. India is a big trading partner with the U.S., and the U.S. wants India to be a larger trading partner. So that would create a tremendous amount of problems. But, there's no question that President Trump is frustrated. But the key to most of his success, and I know there are people that disagree with the degrees of his success, but unlike a normal politician that gets involved with an issue and then gets so attached to the issue, can't extract themselves. They're incapable. Their DNA won't let them do it. Donald Trump does have an ability to walk away. And that is, that's important for President Putin to know, important for President Zelensky to know, important for the EU, important for NATO. And so, as I said, the Trump-Vance administration is not walking away, but they're downshifting. And that's probably appropriate because it's important to try to find those pressure points and like acupuncture, basically. And you look at a back and it's a map. And so they're putting those pins in and turning them to try to find out where those pressure points are to get these two countries to move toward one another. But there's no question President Trump is putting more pressure on President Putin today than he is on President Zelensky.
And let's just talk about NATO and Europe, because you just mentioned there. We heard France and Poland are planning to deepen defence ties in the face of what they call Moscow's war machine. How important now is it for the European supporters of Ukraine to step up and help with peace negotiations?
That's one of the consequences of where we are today that President Trump is happy with. Because from the very beginning of his first term, he said NATO members need to pay. And what that meant was they need to be spending their 2% of gross domestic product, at minimum 2%. And a number of them weren't. Now more of them are, but some of them still aren't, including Italy, including Spain. And so for President Trump, the fact that he is basically downshifting and has been saying to the NATO countries, has been saying to the EU, where EU members separate from NATO countries, hey, you need to step up. Now, the other element to this is President Zelensky, and that is for 4 years now, he has been saying consistently to Europe, if you don't help us, then you're next, because Putin will roll through us and then he's going to attack you. Well, one of the consequences of that is these European countries have said, when President Zelensky said, we need more equipment, they respond to him by saying, well, wait a minute, you told us that he may roll through you and grab us, so we're going to have to increase our defenses and keep all that in our country. So there is this tug of war going on between the countries wanting to help Ukraine prevent Russia from doing anything further or maybe get them out of Ukraine. But at the same time, because it takes so long to build a tank, to build a Patriot missile, to build or to manufacture ammunition, that they're trying to figure out how to manage all of these competing demands, because it's not a list from 1 to 10 where you go vertically. It's a list from 1 to 10 where it's all horizontal. And so the list just gets larger and larger and larger.
John Cavalage, a senior editor of outcome modelling analysis, Issue Insight. Always great to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, Israel has carried out airstrikes near the presidential palace in Syria's capital, Damascus. It is the second time that Israel has targeted Syria this week. The country's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz have said the attack was a warning to Syria after clashes with the Druze community. We can now get the latest from Tel Aviv with our correspondent Trent Murray. Trent, thank you so much for joining me. Why is Israel attacking Syria?
Well, Leigh-Ann, of course, it's nothing new for Israel to be carrying out airstrikes in Syria. Over the past 4 months, there has been hundreds of them. But this airstrike is different. In the past, the airstrikes have targeted things like Air Force bases, military sites, weapon storage areas, allegedly. And that is the IDF carrying out the orders of the government to try and remove the remnants of the Assad regime's military. They say that they were doing that in order to try and make sure there was no threat to Israel, and those types of weapons and planes and tanks couldn't fall into the hands of terrorists. What makes last night's strike different, though, is it doesn't appear to be a strategic strike. It appears to be one to try and send a message. We are hearing it was literally 100 metres from the perimeter of the presidential palace in Damascus. And according to their own statement, it was about sending a message to interim President Ahmed al-Shara to say, don't attack the Druze community. Now, that, of course, comes after several days of clashes that we know have been taking place both in Damascus and other parts of the country. But that airstrike overnight, where you would imagine the interim president would have quite literally been able to hear it from his palace, it was a message from Israel, I think a muscle flex, if you will, that they still retain sort of freedom of navigation in Syrian skies. They can send IDF jets up there quite quickly. So we'll have to wait and see how, of course, the cards fall on all of this. But Israel seemingly trying to send a message to Damascus overnight.
Trent, who are the Druze and why is Israel appealing to the international community to protect them?
The Druze are a religious minority in this region. It is thought there's around 100 million of them scattered between Israel, Syria and Lebanon. They are an offshoot of Shia Islam, but they have their own unique sets of beliefs. This latest round of clashes that we're seeing in Syria between them, some government forces, as well as some Sunni armed groups, is reportedly around a voice note message that was sent over WhatsApp within the Druze community insulting the Prophet Muhammad. Now, that has clearly upset some groups on the ground, and that has caused fighting. But we know some of their leaders in Syria have been now calling for international intervention to try and protect them. I mean, so often, as is the case with Syria, it is a complicated mix of different faith groups and different religious groups, and they are now seemingly trying to come together under this new interim government, but we are still seeing these sporadic clashes on the ground, and that is why I think Israel is trying to jump in here and say it will try and protect them, given that Israel has its own Druze community living across the border in this country.
Trent, are there concerns about fresh clashes and Israeli intervention threatening peace in Syria and in the region? As you said, there's lots of different religious factions and it's a difficult picture within the country.
Yeah, well, look, I think Leigh-Ann, the interim president right now in Syria is trying to hold what is a delicate piece together, isn't he? I mean, after he took power in Damascus, he sort of made it his mission to bring all of those different armed groups that existed throughout the civil war under the control of the state, under the unity of the Syrian armed forces. We're still seeing, I think, some difficulties on the ground enforcing that, and I think Israeli intervention will certainly make it more difficult. I mean, we do know that the new government has signalled it's not looking for a fight with Israel, it's not looking for a conflict with Israel. There was some even discussion that Syria may look to join the Abraham Accords. They've sort of poured water on that in recent days, saying the Abraham Accords is for countries that are not under occupation of Israel, and parts of Syria are right now. We know the IDF still has control of the UN-brokered demilitarized zone between the two countries. They sort of leapt on that after Bashar al-Assad fled to Moscow. So it certainly is remaining delicate, and I think many diplomats in this region, looking back over the past decade and seeing what has happened, will be concerned about sort of any sort of fresh inter-religious conflict. But right now, the signals, the messages that we're getting from Damascus is that they are still trying to hold it together. Worth noting, a number of Druze leaders have sort of called for this violence to come to an end and to call for those Druze fighters to join the overall umbrella group of the Syrian military. But it certainly will be a few, I think, uncertain days ahead.
Trent Murray in Tel Aviv, always good to have you on. Thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. China is evaluating an offer from the US to hold talks over President Trump's tariffs. Washington approached Beijing to discuss Trump's 145% levies. Earlier this week, Trump said he believed there was a very good chance his administration could make a deal with China. Now, Reform UK has snatched a key parliamentary seat from Britain's Labour Party. The vote in Runcorn is Keir Starmer's first by-election test as the Prime Minister. The victory saw Nigel Farage's party taking a constituency which Labour won with a majority of almost 14,700 at the last general election. Reform UK now has control of 7 English councils. Prince Harry has lost his appeal regarding his security arrangements in the UK. The Duke of Sussex had challenged the Home Office's decision to provide him with police protection. The Court of Appeal concluded that whilst the Duke's arrangements were powerful and moving, they were not enough to overturn the original ruling. More than 130 cardinals will arrive in Vatican City within the week to select a new pope. On the first day of the conclave, a smoke signal is expected. Black smoke will signify no decision. White smoke will announce that the 267th pope has been elected. Australians head to the polls this weekend in a general election dominated by a cost of living crisis and a runaway real estate prices. More than 18 million people will choose between the centre-left Labour Party and its Conservative Liberal challengers. But dissatisfactions with both major parties could see big gains for independents. Patrick Falk reports.
Ballot counting won't begin till late in the day on May 3rd, but early voting is well underway in Australia's election. More than 500 early voting centres have been in action since last week. Polls indicate the ruling centre-left Labour Party, led by Anthony Albanese, is slightly ahead. But the Prime Minister can't afford to slip up. With only a narrow lead, he says he still has a mountain to climb to secure his party a majority in Australia's 150-seat parliament. His main challenger, Liberal Party leader Peter Dutton, is confident undecided voters could give his party a kick up come Saturday.
Gentlemen, thank you both for being here tonight. We
The two have sparred with one another over how they'd handle US President Donald Trump.
So I start, I think, with people on 100% trust. But he has different views, different values.
Yes.
I support free and fair trade. He doesn't.
We can trust whoever's in the Oval Office, Mark, and we respect the views of the American people. They've elected a president. I've been very fortunate to work closely with the Obama administration, with Trump.
But it's the cost of living crisis at the forefront of most voters' minds. Both campaigns have promised policies to help first-time buyers purchase homes in a market that's too expensive for many, more so for young people than most.
This election, I really want action on the cost of living crisis and climate action now.
The outcome of this election could be decided by young voters. Data from the Australian Election Commission showed millennials and Gen Z accounted for 43% of those casting ballots, compared to 33% representation of baby boomers. But many have shown disillusionment with the country's two-party system.
A lot of young people will vote for Labor just so that Dutton doesn't come in, instead of voting for who they actually want to vote for, like a independent or the Greens.
The conflict in the Middle East has seen many voters factoring in foreign policy as well. In traditionally Labour strongholds, many people are dissatisfied with Albanese's messaging on the war. He's been walking a diplomatic tightrope between expressing concern for Palestinians while supporting Israel's right to defend itself.
Recently, what's happened in Palestine has really tipped many of us over the edge to become more mobilised. So many of us who used to vote Labor or, some of the other parties are now questioning the duopoly of the two-party system.
Should Labour fail to gain a majority in Parliament, independents could hold the balance of power. Patrick Fogg, Al Arabiya.
Now, Germany's AfD party has been labelled right-wing extremist by the country's domestic intelligence agency. The federal office, which is responsible for counterintelligence and investigating terror threats, announced the AfD worked against Germany's democratic system and excluded certain groups from equal participation in society. We can now go live to Berlin to speak to journalist and host of Mad in Germany podcast, James Jackson. James, great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining me. James, why does a 1,000-page internal report claim the AfD is a threat to Germany?
So this is a report by one of Germany's main intelligence services, the Office for Constitutional Protection. As the name shows, their goal is to protect Germany's constitution, which of course came out of the post-war settlement after the Nazis were defeated. So they actually have significantly more powers than some comparable domestic intelligence organizations in other countries. So they look at parties, right-wing, left-wing extremist groups, as well as some religious groups, and are tasked with analysing whether they are a threat to democracy. For quite a few years now, the AfD as a whole has been viewed as a suspected threat to democracy. But now they've said officially in 1,100 pages that the AfD is certified an right-wing extremist group as the entire party. Previously, it was just a number of states in the east with particularly extreme leaders, Saxony, Anhalt, and Thuringia. But now they've said it's the entire party. And that's particularly because of how they view Germany's Muslim population of about 5 million, with the report saying that they do not view them as, the AfD does not view German Muslims as normal German citizens, as part of the people, the German people.
What does this mean for the AfD, who actually came second in recent elections in Germany? And could it possibly raise support for the party?
I think that's a really good question. Many people in Germany are now doing a victory lap and saying, well, now that, they've been categorized by the Office for Constitutional Protection as a right-wing extremist, no one will vote for them. That's clearly not true. If you look at the states where they have been categorized as this before, they actually have come in first place in some of those with particularly extreme leaders. So the AfD has been very good at putting out its narrative that this is part of a quote unquote deep state attempt to try and undermine the AfD. It's politically motivated interference in the democratic process. And the co-leaders called it a severe blow to democracy in Germany. So they are coming out and fighting against this. And I think people who've already decided that they're going to vote for the AfD, I don't think that this report will make that much difference, especially because the AfD can argue somewhat credibly that there are links between the ruling parties, the CDU in particular, and this organization. In fact, it doesn't have a president at the moment because he stood aside so that he could run for the CDU as a candidate, which is the mainstream Christian Democrats, the Conservative Party, Angela Merkel, and incoming Chancellor Friedrich Merz. So the real question is, how will the CDU react to this? Because they've been showing themselves to be open to the AfD and cooperation on a number of levels, including in a historic vote a few months ago about migration, where they voted alongside the AfD, breaking a huge taboo in German politics. So I think the real problem and problems are for the CDU right now, and that's going to be putting pressure on Friedrich Merz to do something.
So you've just been explaining there, as we know, Friedrich Merz is due to be sworn in as Germany's new chancellor very soon. But just let's go back to the elections. The AfD party's popularity is growing. Why are Germans voting for the far right?
Well, you're right. And in fact, I think it's one particularly shocking aspect is that as this report comes out, the AfD are actually ahead in the polls, ahead of the CDU, as the most popular party for the first time in many, many years in Germany, with a right-wing extremist party to be number one. The question of why people are voting for them is quite varied. I think dissatisfaction with mainstream politics is a large part of it. They came second in the election in February, partly because of a focus on migration. Now, of course, Germany was beset by a number of very tragic terrorist attacks committed by people who had previously asked for asylum in the country. And many voters felt like their concerns were not being addressed by that, despite the fact that both of the two mainstream parties, the SPD and CDU, had tacked to the right and towards the AfD's position on migration, although it's not clear whether that had much effect. There's also a widespread dissatisfaction with the German elite, as the party's supporters would put it, because Germany is quite a hierarchical society. And I think a lot of people would feel that their voices aren't listened to, whether that's on issues like migration or, of course, economic inequality, which is a huge problem in the country.
James Jackson, fascinating insights. Thank you so much for joining me, Berlin-based journalist. Once again, great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Let's take another look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Washington's envoy has warned that US President Donald Trump could skip the upcoming NATO summit if other members of the defense alliance do not act on burden sharing. That's according to The Spiegel magazine, who have quoted European diplomatic sources. Germany has been under pressure to boost defense spending after US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth spoke with his German counterpart Boris Pistorius last week. An Illinois landlord found guilty of a hate crime that left a 6-year-old Muslim boy dead and his mother wounded will be sentenced today. 73-year-old Joseph Shuba was convicted after stabbing Palestinian-American Wadid Al-Fayoumi and his mother Hanan Shaheen in 2023. The family had been renting rooms in Shuba's home in Plainfield, about 40 miles from Chicago, when the attack took place. President Trump has announced his first judicial nomination since returning to the White House for his second term. He's nominated Whitney Herman Dorfer, currently serving under Tennessee's Republican Attorney General, to a seat on the Federal Appeals Court. The seat became available after Joe Biden's nominee to the Sixth Circuit failed to secure confirmation before he left office. And patients in the UK may be able to access weight loss injections over the counter at British pharmacies, and that's according to a new report. Ozempic and Mounjaro could be available to buy after a short consultation at the same cost of an NHS prescription. Comedian Russell Brand has been given bail after appearing at Westminster Magistrates Court in London earlier today, charged with rape and sexual assault. The 49-year-old actor was charged last month with 1 count of rape, indecent assault and oral rape, as well as 2 counts of sexual assault. We can now go live to London to speak with our correspondent, Ollie Barrett. Ollie, thank you so much for joining me. Russell Brand does deny the allegations he's been charged with. Did he have anything to say in court today?
No, Leigh-Ann, he didn't say much at all. The only time he spoke was when he stood to confirm his name, his address, his age, and to confirm that he understood the proceedings and that there was an understanding there from him as well of the bail conditions that were being set for him. At the end of the hearing, he briefly said a couple of words. Thank you, he said to the judge as the hearing ended. He didn't make a plea today of guilty or not guilty. That was not what this particular quite procedural hearing was about. He also didn't say anything to reporters as he arrived at Westminster Magistrates Court. There was a large crowd of them there as he arrived. He didn't say anything either as he left the court after the brief hearing, which only lasted about 11 or 12 minutes.
As we mentioned, Russell Brand has now been bailed. When are we actually expecting to see him back in court, Ollie?
That's right. The judge said that the next court appearance will be on May the 30th. And in this brief hearing, the judge said to Russell Brand, you face a number of allegations, 5 in total, and you listed them, Leigh-Ann. The judge said some of them are what could be called indictable only. And he said that what he meant by that is the court must then send them to the Crown Court for trial. And that's why he told Russell Brand that that next hearing on May the 30th would be at the Central Criminal Court. And the judge said, you might know this as the Old Bailey. And he said that's when there will be a plea and trial preparation hearing, as I say, the 30th of May. So Russell Brand will be on bail until that next hearing at the court that we all know as the Old Bailey here in London.
These charges all came about following a TV documentary and a Sunday Times investigation. Ollie, can you just remind us about both of those?
It was joint reporting, as you say, between newspapers and television, and it contained a number of allegations which Russell Brand denied at the time and has denied since. It led to that joint investigation in the British media to a number of further allegations against Russell Brand coming forward from various women, which he has denied too. The charges that we were hearing in court today relate to between 1999 and 2004-2005, 4 separate women. That 1999 allegation relates to a claim that was made after the Labour Party conference in Bournemouth that was taking place at that time. As I say, 4 separate women making these allegations. You also said that Russell Brand was charged last month. We have heard from him recently insisting again that he denies all the allegations, and he says he's looking forward to these court hearings so that he says he can prove his innocence.
And whilst we have you, there is a big story pretty much dominating the political world in the UK today. And this is after right-winged Reform Party has had a really successful night in local by-elections. One of them, they won by just 6 votes. What more can you tell us, Ollie?
That's right, Leigh-Ann. That's the by-election in Runcorn, which was called because the Labour MP was forced to leave that position because he punched a man in the street and ended up being convicted of it. And that has been historically one of Labour's safest seats, but it's now being taken by Nigel Farage's Reform UK. And that wasn't their only victory. They have taken control of a series of council authorities in parts of England. They've also won a mayoral race in Greater Lincolnshire. And so what we're seeing is that some of the national polling in recent weeks and months that suggested that Reform have a lot of support in the UK at the moment, that is being borne out by this series of local elections. Now, if you extrapolate that to a future general election, it suggests that Reform could perform very well. That is a long way away. There's a lot of caveats that we should add into there as well about local elections not being easy to extrapolate when it comes to the way people actually vote in general elections. But Nigel Farage insists that today shows he can become the country's next Prime Minister. Now, as I say, a long way to go before we are anywhere near that prospect. And the other parties, Labour, the governing party, and the largest opposition party, the Conservatives, insist that they can turn things round in the years ahead. But there is absolutely no doubt that this is a seismic day in British politics.
Yes, indeed. Ollie Barrett in London, great to have you on. Thank you very much. Let's take a look at the top business news. Apple says devices sold in the US will no longer come from China as the tech giant tries to mitigate the impact of Donald Trump's tariffs. Most iPhones will be sourced from India instead, with iPads coming from Vietnam to prevent dramatic price rises for American consumers. Apple has said the US president's escalating trade war has had a limited impact on its financial performance so far. Now, Shein and Temu price rise for US consumers as Donald Trump closes a postage loophole. The Chinese online retail giants relied on the exemption to sell and ship low-value items directly to the US without having to pay duties or import taxes. Supporters of the loophole, which applied to parcels worth less than $800, argued it helped streamline the customs process. Turning to sports news now, and Manchester United and Tottenham are both celebrating Europa League semi-final first leg wins. Both sides have taken huge strides towards reaching the final. The winners of the Europa League will go into the following season's Champions League. And university scientists have revealed that Liverpool fans celebrating the club's title win caused a series of tremors. Arne Slot's side secured the club's 20th top-flight championship after beating Tottenham 5-1 at Anfield Stadium. The data was recorded by University of Liverpool earth scientists using equipment that detects earthquakes. Well, at least everybody had a good time. A reminder of our top stories. The US withdraws from formal peace negotiations with Ukraine after Putin refused to agree to a ceasefire. Israel launches airstrikes at Damascus as Netanyahu sends a message to Syria. Germany's AfD party is labelled far-right extremist by the country's intelligence agency. And actor Russell Brand is bailed after appearing in court on rape and sexual assault charges. That's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda, News Sephora is coming up next. Plus, we'll be back with a best of the week from W News Extra a little later on. Goodbye and thank you.